Hi everybody, I know that subjunctive is a big source of stress for everybody learning French, so the purpose of this video is to kind of demystify subjunctive. We're going to see how we form the subjunctive and how you can use it in real life, the 4 or 5 situations and the 10 verbs you need to focus on to really master subjunctive, become more fluent with your French, and then you can move on to other situations where we also use subjunctive. But first, I want you to really focus on those 4 or 5 situations, which I'm going to tell you about right now. All right, so let's get started. The slides are in French, but I'll do the presentation in English. Let me know in the comments if you would prefer a video all in French. And then next one, I will do all in French. And today, so we're looking at the subjunctive, all the that you need to know about subjunctive, the minimum you need to know about subjunctive. First, we'll look at how we create subjunctive. Then I created a mind map to show you the 5 situations where we use subjunctive in daily life. Then there's the 10 irregular verbs you need to learn. You can't avoid those. We use them all the time, so you need to learn them in all the conjugaisons, like je, tu, il, nous, vous, il in the plural. And then I give you a list of exercises and some prompts for creative writing to use the subjunctive. And I also invite you to go to Spotify and listen to a bunch of songs using the subjunctive. Okay, so let's look at how we create the subjunctive now in a sentence. So first, it's important to know that it always starts with que before the verb in the subjunctive. And usually a sentence with subjunctive comes in 2 parts. The first part has a subject, a verb, and sometimes an object. Then comes the que, the second subject, and the second verb in a subjunctive, and sometimes followed by an object. And you know, I like to talk about how a language sounds, especially when I talk about French conjugations. And here we have an example. For example, the verbs in ER, chanter, jouer, manger, all these verbs, in the subjunctive présent, they will be the same as the indicatif présent. The regular present that you use all the time is the same as the subjunctive présent for these verbs. When you conjugate with je, tu, il, elle, on, and il, elle in the plural. That's why sometimes your mind can be confused. It's like, okay, am I in the subjunctive or indicatif? Am I right? Am I wrong? And you're panicking. It's okay. If you don't remember subjunctive for verbs in ER, it's the same as the present. So just go with what you know. Manger, jouer, all these verbs, subjunctive is very simple, except with nous and vous. With nous and vous, here we're similar to the imparfait. So, like manger in the present is nous mangeons, in the imparfait is nous mangions, in subjunctif is que nous mangions. So again, your mind will be like, wait, what tense is that? But don't worry, just go with the sounds, with what sounds right for you. And if it's wrong, it's not a big deal. We will still understand what you mean. So don't worry too much. Here I'm just reminding you how we create the subjunctive. And what's most important is when you learn a verb in the subjunctive, always learn with que. Que je fasse, que je mange, que je joue, que vous preniez, que vous mangiez. And when you're used to conjugating with that que, when you're in a sentence and you start with que, then your mind goes with, okay, I know this structure, there's a que, I know it's subjunctive, I've learned it, que je mange, que je fasse. It becomes natural. That's the trick. That's how we do it in a French school when we're very little. And we actually have to learn all of those verbs like you are doing now. And that's how we do it. We learn it with the que in front of it. Okay, let's go back to how we create a subjunctive for a verb. Let's look at the subjunctive présent. The termination, les terminaisons, the endings of the verbs are the same throughout the verb groups. So first group, second group, third group, they all have the same endings. So that makes it somewhat easier. Subjunctive always has the same endings. E for je, is, I, I-O-N-S, I-E-Z, E-N-T. So, je and with E, tu, E-S, il, elle, on, E, except for some irregular verbs. Nous, I-O-N-S, vous, I-E-Z, il, elle, pluriel, E-N-T. And the radical is the same as the third person of the present in the plural. So il and elle in the plural of the present tense. And that's why it's similar to present for the verbs in ER and for many verbs. So for example, ils chantent, the radical will be chante without the ending. Ils grandissent, grandissent, the radical ends on the two S. Ils écrivent, that's the present. And the subjunctive, the radical for the subjunctive is écrivent, ending on the V. Ils connaissent, same as grandissent, we end on the two S. Ils boivent, that's the present of the verb boire. So, ils boivent, the radical becomes boivent, but only for je, tu, il, elle, on, and il, elle in the plural, because in the present tense, nous and vous are nous buvons and vous buvez. They have a different radical in the present, and we keep that difference in the subjunctive. That's the exceptions. If you don't remember at first, that's okay. As you progress, you will start to hear and to remember those differences. So don't worry too much about it at the beginning, but make sure you know your conjugations in the present tense, and that will make subjunctive a lot easier. Make sure you know those verb radicals in the present. I wrote a little guide that you can download on my website if you want to study again those radicals in the present tense. So, so when the radical of nous and vous is different as the radical for il and elle in the plural in the present, this difference stays in the subjunctive. So that's my example with boire. Ils boivent. Subjunctif will be que je boive, que tu boives, qu'ils boivent, and qu'ils boivent in the plural. With nous and vous, it becomes que nous buvions, que vous buviez, modeled on the present. So here are more examples. Que je chante, que tu finisses, qu'ils prennent, que nous buvions, que vous preniez, qu'ils boivent. So that's all subjunctive. And you see, I always start with que, so that I get used to that sentence. And now what's very important is that there are 10 irregular verbs that we use all the time. They're very common verbs, so you have to learn them and to practice them a lot with the que, je, que tu, all these sentences with those verbs. And these verbs are être, avoir, aller, falloir, pleuvoir, savoir, faire, valoir, pouvoir, and vouloir. And I have a chart with it that we'll see in a few minutes. So that's for the subjunctive présent. I invite you to pause the video, take a break, make a few examples with a few verbs, and then come back to the video and study the rest of the subjunctive. All right, now let's look at subjunctif passé. Subjunctif passé is a compound tense, so there are two parts in the verbs. First, we have the auxiliaire, so être or avoir, which follow the same rules as in the passé composé. And être or avoir will be conjugated in the subjunctive. So that's why you really need to know what's the subjunctif présent of être or avoir. So for avoir, it will sound like est, que j'ai, que tu es, qu'il est, qu'ils aient in the plural, and que nous ayons, que vous ayez. For être, it's soit, que je sois, que tu sois, qu'il ou elle soit, qu'il ou elle in the plural, soit, nous and vous, que nous soyons, que vous soyez. And then we add the participe passé, which is the same participle as in the passé composé. Wrote down a few examples here. Que j'ai pris, que tu sois venu, qu'il ait vu, que nous ayons dû, que vous soyez partis, qu'il se soit trompé. always que, subject, auxiliary, participle. Okay, there's a question that comes up a lot. Do French people actually use the subjunctive? Unfortunately, yes, we do all the time, but only in a few situations. So in all the other situations, we do make a lot of mistakes, so don't worry too much yourself. You can make mistakes, that's okay. There are a few situations in daily life where we can't avoid subjunctive, and we don't really think about it. We're just very used to hearing it, saying it, and that's why we repeat it the way we've heard it. So that's my advice for you. How to master subjunctive would be to listen a lot and practice saying those sentences, and then it will become natural. Unfortunately, there's no easy way. For me, that's my best advice for you, is to practice a lot. And then if you're preparing for DELF or another test, or if you need to study in France, you will have to learn quite a few sentence structures and trigger words that call for subjunctive. And unfortunately here, again, there's no easy way. You will have to learn and remember, or have your cheat sheet all the time with you to know which words call for subjunctive. So remember from the previous slide, subjunctive, most of the sentences are in two parts. There's the first proposition 1, like the first clause, que, second clause. And what's very important is that the subject 1 is different from subject 2. In the two parts of the sentence, there's a different subject. If it's the same subject, you can avoid the subjunctive. You just use infinitive. So that's a lot easier. If you see that subject 1 and subject 2 are identical, don't worry about subjunctive, just use infinitive. And when you can't avoid to have two different subjects, that's where you need subjunctive. And what you need to remember is subjunctive is what I call subjective. So we created it to express our feelings or thoughts, but nothing that's for sure, nothing certain. It's all like feelings. It comes from the heart, not from the head. It's not a fact. It's not absolute truth. It's more like a feeling or a gut feeling or impression. And now another question is, when do we use subjunctive present or past? So here it has to do with the verb to, that the action of the verb to compared to the action in the verb 1, in the first part of the sentence. Most of the time we use subjunctive présent, but in some situations we do use subjunctive passé. But most of the time subjunctive is in the present. In the grammar books, you will find imparfait du subjonctif. Forget about this one, we never use it. We only use subjunctif présent and the subjunctif passé I presented in the previous slide. So let's look at the relationship between verb 1 and verb 2. So if the action of verb 2 is ongoing or future compared to verb 1, that is subjunctif présent. And that's the most common use. If the action in verb 2 is finished when verb 1 happens, then it is subjunctif passé. Means that verb 2 happened before verb 1, then we use subjunctif passé. You can pause the video if you need more time to read the chart, and I have some examples in the mind map that we will see on the next slide. Okay, now let's see what you need to focus on at first. Don't try to master the whole subjunctive because it's just too dense, so go one step at a time. I created a sequence that I think makes sense, but maybe you need different structures. The way you speak calls for this structure more than the other one, so feel free to play with the sequence and to learn it in a way that makes sense to you. So, and also I want to stress that it's important to learn and know really well the 10 irregular verbs with the structure, with the subjunctive, with que, and then the verb in the subjunctive. That's very important because they're irregular, but we use them every day, all the time. So if you know these verbs, you'll see that you will make progress faster, you will become more fluent because you don't need to think about the conjugation of those verbs. It's a time investment at the beginning, but it will pay off very quickly. Okay, let's look at those 4 or 5 situations I selected for you. So the first would be obligation or constraints. We'll see with what structure we use that. Second is to express a command. You want to do something, you wish to do something, or you have a desire to do something. Third one is what comes from the heart. You're expressing feelings about something, and it's very linked to the wish and desire that we had in number 2. Fourth one is judgment or expressing feelings with adjectives. So it's linked again, it's expressing what you think, what you have inside of you. So that's why we use it all the time. We spend our time telling other people how we feel, and that's why we need the subjunctive in French. And number 5 is expressing doubt with some very specific sentence structures, which you can avoid too. So the 5th one is like optional. There are ways to avoid use number 5, at least at the beginning. Okay, let's dive into the details. Situation number 1, obligation, having to do something with il faut que. And that's personal obligation, like you're putting in English is like I have to do something. It could be general rule, like I must do something or I have to do something, il faut que. And this one is always followed by subjunctif. Got a few examples. Il faut que j'étudie les verbes, il faut qu'on soit vigilant, il faut que tu saches faire ça. And il faut, it will always start with il faut. There's no other conjugation with je, tu, or any other. It's always il faut que. One has to do this, one has to do that. When it's like a general obligation from like society or norms, rules, anything else other than your feeling that you have to do something, there's a way to avoid subjunctif. You can use il faut and infinitive. Il faut manger sainement. Il ne faut pas se mettre sous un arbre quand il y a de l'orage. It's common sense. You shouldn't stand under a tree when there's a storm. It's dangerous. So il ne faut pas se mettre. That's il faut and infinitive. Don't use the subjunctive there. It's you don't need to do that. Let's talk about negation. Il ne faut pas que. For personal obligation, you can say it, but I think it's pretty rare. I think we would use je n'ai pas besoin de an infinitive. I don't need to do that. Il ne faut pas que j'étudie les verbes. It's okay, it's grammatically correct, but I would say je n'ai pas besoin d'étudier les verbes. So here, no subjunctive. Just remember that il faut que, personal obligation, affirmative. All right, so second very common situation is to express the goal or intention to do something. And we use pour que. In order to do this, pour faire ça, pour que ça arrive. And this is followed by subjonctif. Tu dois parler fort pour qu'ils t'entendent. J'ai dit aux enfants de ne pas faire de bruit pour que tu puisses dormir. So entendre is subjunctif, puisse is subjunctif. And that's very common. Every time we need to do something in order to, we use pour que. So remember that one. Third one is with verb, like subjective verbs, verbs expressing things you would like to do, you want to do, you wish to do. Aimer, vouloir, souhaiter, que. If they're not followed by que, you don't need to worry about it. It's not subjunctive. It will be just regular infinitive. But if it's que, because the subject in the verb 1 and verb 2, so verb 1 is aimer, and it has a different subject as verb 2 that comes after the que, that's where you need the subjunctive. For example, j'aimerais que tu ailles faire des courses il ne veut pas qu'elle vienne. Si vous souhaitez que nous annulions votre abonnement, contactez-nous. I, vienne, and annulions, these three verbs are subjunctive. And often when we want to be polite, the verb that comes in the first part is in the conditionnel. J'aimerais que tu ailles, je souhaiterais que vous annuliez mon abonnement. That's a polite way of asking somebody to do something for you. Situation number 4, judgment, expressing feelings. That's the structure, subject, verb, adjective, followed by que. And again, the que is necessary because the second verb has a different subject as the verb number 1. Let's look at some examples. Il n'est pas normal que vous soyez en retard tous les jours. Je trouve normal qu'on doive payer des impôts. Les enfants sont contents que ce soit le week-end. And here we can easily use subjonctive passé because often the verb to is finished, the action of verb 2 is finished before the action of verb 1. The verb 1 is often just expressing your feeling at the moment about something that happened in the past. And that's when we use subjonctive passé. For example, c'est cool qu'on ait pu se voir aujourd'hui. So I met a friend today and we're about to say goodbye, and I want to say I had a really good time and it was really nice that we had the chance to see each other. C'est cool qu'on ait pu se voir aujourd'hui. Second example, nous sommes tristes que tu sois parti si tôt. Maybe somebody left, a friend was visiting, they left, and I'm calling in the evening just to make sure they got home safely, and I can express my feeling that I'm sad they had to leave so early. Nous sommes tristes que tu sois parti si tôt. Third example, c'est pas sympa qu'il t'ait pas appelé pendant que tu étais à l'hôpital. So maybe I had a friend in the hospital and other friends didn't call her, and I think it's not very nice of them. So I'm going to say, c'est pas sympa qu'il t'ait pas appelé pendant que tu étais à l'hôpital. Now she's out of the hospital, but they should have called when she was there. So that's very common when we express a judgment with an adjective. You see, it often starts with c'est plus the adjective, or il est plus the adjective, or je trouve, adjective, que something. That's a very, very common situation. So at first, I would recommend you focus on those 4 situations. They are very common, they happen all the time, and try to practice as much as you can until you feel comfortable. And don't forget those irregular verbs. And the 5th situation, I think you may have heard about it. It has to do with verbs that are about certainty. When they're in the affirmative, in a statement, they're followed with indicatif, with regular, present, or passé composé. But when they're negative, they're in a negative sentence, they become, the second verb becomes subjunctive to express the doubt, uncertainty. So those verbs are what we call verbs of the head, like thinking, head, and when they're negative, they're followed by subjunctive. Like ne pas penser que, ne pas être sûr que, ne pas croire que. Let's look at examples. Je ne pense pas que ce soit une bonne idée. Le docteur ne pense pas que ce soit le Covid-19. Il dit que c'est juste une grippe. Je ne crois pas que vous soyez la bonne personne pour cet emploi. Je ne crois pas qu'il fasse assez d'efforts. Donc, je ne crois pas que, je ne pense pas que, always followed with subjunctive. Now, the good thing is that there's a way to avoid that is to don't say je ne pense pas que and something affirmative. Start with je pense que and then put the negation in the second part, and then you can avoid subjunctive. Like, je pense que ce n'est pas une bonne idée. Le docteur pense que ce n'est pas le Covid-19. Je crois que vous n'êtes pas la bonne personne pour cet emploi. So sometimes there's a little nuance in the meaning, but it doesn't really matter. It's, at least you will get the grammar right and you will avoid thinking about the subjunctive. Try to start your sentences with je pense que, je crois que, and you'll be fine. Okay, there's one more verb to express doubt, and it's the verb je doute que. I doubt that. Je doute que, and je doute que le magasin soit ouvert. Je ne suis pas sûre que le magasin soit ouvert. That's the same thing. And remember to learn those irregular verbs and practice a lot with them. Listen when you're listening to a movie or a podcast or anything. Try to pay attention to the way they use subjunctive. Maybe try to repeat some sentences, and then after a while it will become very natural. Don't stress too much about it. If you don't know what the subjunctive is, just use the conjugation of the present or a conditionnel if it's uncertain, and you'll get by. People will understand what you mean. So don't worry too much about it. But if you're trying to improve your French, that's what I think you should focus on. All right, let's look at those irregular verbs. So there's 10 verbs you need to know. There's être, que je sois, que tu sois, qu'il soit, que nous soyons, que vous soyez. Avoir, que j'ai, que tu aies, qu'il est, que nous ayons, que vous ayez. And it's important to know that the pronunciation for est is the same as the present. Que j'ai, que j'ai, same thing. And faire, que je fasse, que nous fassions, que vous fassiez. Aller, que j'aille, que nous allions, que vous alliez. So this one, I know a lot of people get confused between avoir and aller. Aller is 2 syllables, A-I. It's like you pronouncing the 2 letters individually. A-I, que j'aille, que tu ailles, qu'il aille. And nous and vous is a bit different, que nous allions, que vous alliez. So it's not the ye, it's a li, lion, lié. Que j'aille, que nous allions, que vous alliez. Falloir, qu'il faille. Valoir, que je vaille, que nous valions, que vous valiez. Pleuvoir, qu'il pleuve. Je ne crois pas qu'il pleuve maintenant, par exemple. Savoir, que je sache, que nous sachions, que vous sachiez. Pouvoir, que je puisse, que nous puissions, que vous puissiez. Vouloir, que je veuille, que nous voulions, que vous vouliez. I added some other verbs that are regular, but that are a bit different than the indicatif present, and that we use a lot. For example, devoir, que je doive, que nous devions, que vous deviez. Prendre, que je prenne, que nous prenions, que vous preniez. Mettre, que je mette, que nous mettions, que vous mettiez. Finir, que je finisse, que nous finissions, que vous finissiez. Écrire, que j'écrive, que nous écrivions, que vous écriviez. Connaître, que je connaisse, que nous connaissions, que vous connaissiez. Common question that comes often is, should I use subjunctif or indicatif? Indicatif is the mood of certainty. So these are the verbs of the head, as we say, objective verbs. We talk about facts, about things we can see or hear, or truth, things we're sure of. For example, penser, croire, trouver, déclarer, constater, s'assurer que, vérifier. And some structures like il est certain, it is sure. Il est évident que, it's obvious that. Il est clair que, it's very clear that. Il est sûr que, it's the same as it is certain that. So all of these are based on facts, evidence, and that leads us to certainty. There's another verb that is espérer, to hope. Espérer que is followed by indicatif. J'espère que tu as pris un parapluie, j'espère qu'il ne pleuvra pas. Or can be conditional for future in the past. J'espérais qu'il viendrait, mais il n'est pas venu. Sometimes it's tempting to use subjunctif, but espérer goes with indicatif. Just remember that. We have some conjunctions you need to be careful. Avant que goes with subjunctif. You're waiting for something, it hasn't happened, so it's not certain. Subjunctif. Avant que plus subjunctif. Après que something has happened, so it's a fact, then it's indicatif. Après que plus indicatif. But a lot of French people get that mixed up, so don't worry too much about it. Just if you need to take a test, remember avant que subjonctif, après que indicatif. And also another situation where we use subjunctive is in a question, like a formal question, where we reverse the subject and the verb. Then if there's a second verb, it's often subjunctif. Like, pensez-vous qu'il réussisse le test? It's a bit like the pensez when it's negative. We're not sure he's gonna pass the test or not. So we're in the uncertainty mood, we're in the subjunctif. Pensez-vous qu'il réussisse le test? Okay, let's go to the second step. Once you master what you're comfortable with, the 4 or 5 situations we saw earlier, you can go to the next step and try to use a richer vocabulary, learn more structures, more words, and then practice using subjunctive with those ones. But that's only the second step. Don't worry too much about it at the beginning. Become comfortable using the subjunctive and conjugating the verbs in the subjunctive first. So I put some structures here as an example. Feel free to pause the video, look at it, or look at it later. I'm not going to go too much into details about it now. It's a funny meme also about subjunctive, because some verbs can be followed by either subjunctive or indicatif, depending on the degree of certainty that you want to put in your sentence. And these are verbs like admettre, comprendre, expliquer, supposer. A lot of French people get confused as well. We use, in informal situations, we will use future or conditionnel or present or subjunctif. We don't really know the rules unless we check in a grammar book. So unless you're taking C1 or C2 exams and you need to make sure that you get it right, don't worry too much about it. If you want to practice, as usual, there are exercises on françaisfacile.com. They were created by other teachers, so I have no control about the content of these, but there are a lot of useful exercises. You can also find other websites with exercises. The grammar book, Grammaire progressive du français, is very good. There's quite a few pages on subjunctive for you to practice different situations and all the uses, especially the main ones that we saw in the first part. I strongly invite you to listen to the Spotify playlist. For example, there's the Céline Dion song Pour que tu m'aimes encore. That's subjunctive. If you like Céline Dion, go ahead. But there's a lot of different songs as well with subjunctive, and you can find your favorite ones and practice singing. That's very good practice. For creative writing, here are a few prompts for you. For example, you can create your to-do list for tomorrow. Il faut que je... Qu'est-ce qu'il faut que vous fassiez demain? Qu'est-ce qu'il faut que vous fassiez aujourd'hui? Ou qu'est-ce qu'il faut que vous fassiez la semaine prochaine? That's a good practice for subjunctive. Maybe try to write a message to children, or what you think about the future, what you would like for the future. J'aimerais que, that will be followed by subjunctive. Try to write a message for your roommates, maybe. Je ne veux pas que vous. I don't want you to do this or that. That's subjunctif. Je ne veux pas que vous. Je ne crois pas que vous. Je ne pense pas que vous. Try practicing all these structures. Or with pour que. Je voudrais que vous fassiez ça pour que something. Your convictions. Je ne pense pas que. Je ne crois pas que, like general, political, or anything you think or don't think. And you can try to practice also with pour que something happens, il faut something. And the first part with pour que will be with subjunctif, but the second part can be subjunctif as well. Pour que l'eau bout, il faut que tu la chauffes. If the subject is different in the après il faut, then that's subjunctif as well. So that's double practice. And if you like this mini guide, this video, and the PowerPoint, please feel free to share, subscribe to my channel, and go to my website. Let's follow me on social media, and let's discuss there. Bye! À bientôt!